gonna. I don't believe there's anybody there yet.
Okay. Is it a different when I click the link it says video unavailable? Is that because we just haven't started yet?
If you go to that, I gave you hold on. Because it's a new link.
Ah.
Hold on. I'm gonna go over to Messenger real quick, and this is the actual YouTube link to see what we're doing.
Gotcha.
Because when I've been having fights with Copilot and swearing contests with that thing. I swear to God. Well, that's much better. I just wish I was a little more subdued, so I don't see what he is. So I set the live up from yesterday and gave you that link.
Right.
And after, like, oh, you can't do that. I'm like, you motherfucker, you told me what I fucking needed to do. And so I had to redo everything from scratch this morning. And I actually went through, and that link that's on the YouTube, I went and reposted it from my social media even before we started. And I don't really care about people going to this live just to get the bugs worked out, so I got what the fuck I'm doing in the future type thing.
Right.
I hope this records. I should be able to. Okay, so because I got for example, I'm in Titans. As I'm bringing these people on, like we brought Jim Zub on to do Conan, okay? I just blind called him, and Ray taped him, and Ray did good with Jim, and Jim hooked me up with people at Titan. So the nice lady at Titan has put me on everything. Everything that's going on with Titan, I'm there. So I have.
And we're live already, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Hold on. Can you hear us, Joe?
Yes.
All right. I don't know. I'm gonna give you a link on Messenger here because a link I gave you the other day was not a good link to actually view the live. I had to redo everything this morning, so I just sent you a Messenger the link on the live. Like I was telling Bobby, this is just a test live. I didn't expect many people to be here. I didn't care who came here. It was more or less just me trying to figure out how to do, the logistics on it. Because like I was telling Bobby before we taped Joe, I'm starting to bring on bigger creators on this show again. I had Jim Zub a few weeks ago. And as I'm bringing these creators on, they're hooking me up with their PR people on the other side. So like with Titan and Xenoscope and soon to be probably Mad Cave, I'm on their whatever list. So if an opportunity comes up for an interview, for a taping, I'm on that list. I know Titan at the middle of the month, their new book for War of the Worlds, we're planning to do a live taping. So this is kind of like to do that. And for like you and Joe and Bobby, we do the live taping and build that audience up. And then it gets scheduled and put out. So it's like two bangs for the buck. Because the YouTube channel, like I was telling Bobby Joe, I just refurbished the YouTube channel like in the last month. I wanted to be professional. That's where I'm going to do the bulk of stuff. You're kind of Shane Brady, Joe. You want to fix that before anything? And Joe, you are a great guest. I will have you on anytime. Bobby,
thank you.
Not so much.
I mean,
because I was just pitching Bobby out a couple minutes ago. I'm like, I'm editing your Bobby Nash Ruins the Show, which also comes out on April 13th, by the way. So it's going to be the 250th show. So Bobby Ruins the anniversary show. And I was editing it. I'm like, Bobby, this editing that I'm trying to get this done is a bitch to do. Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate you very much. It was just me and Joe. Things would be great.
My work here is done.
Boom.
You have completed. All right. We are going, Joe, Bobby, have any questions before we start doing this?
No, I'm good.
Everybody's good. All right, we are going to do the magazine show and see how that goes. I don't know why I'm so off. I don't care. This is fine. I don't know what's going on. All right. Okay. So, anybody might join us throughout the podcast. We are going to take this first episode here. So, welcome to the History Podcast. Once again, I have the lovely Joe Crow, one of my favorite guests on the show. Thank you, Joe, for taking time out of your busy schedule. And we also have Bobby Nash. And Bobby Nash is a guest, but he's not on that Joe Crow list of
I
guests.
mean,
So
So you've got your best guest and your worst guest on the same episode.
thank you very much.
we're
I'm
gonna
trying
try
to,
to even out. Yeah.
yeah, I try to make you guys good and not be negative. But thank you, Bobby, for pointing that out. So Joe, why don't you tell the fans a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go with Bobby.
I'm the director of the Sci-Fi Classics track at Dragon Con in Atlanta. I'm an editor and a writer, and I've been in, I think almost maybe 8 or 9 or 10 anthologies about comics and stuff like that. Like I've been in books about the Avengers, Marvel Team Up. Some Jim Beard stuff. I must have some kind of blackmail thing happening with him because he keeps asking me to do things.
I'm not sure if the blackmail is because he's blackmailing you or you're blackmailing him, but you're right. You guys just
Exactly.
keep popping up together. So, did you have anything else to say, Joe, before we move
Yeah,
on?
I'm good. Let's.
Joe, you also don't you still do the wrestling stuff? Which I found
I
fascinating.
do around Alabama, deepest, darkest Alabama. Just if there's an indie wrestling show one weekend, I'm probably the announcer.
Now, Bobby, that was Joe's introduction. He's been in like 10 of these anthologies and whatever. So let's see if you can possibly top this introduction. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, I've been I have a little over 215 published credits.
Yeah. Boom.
They're not all comic about comics. Some of them are just comics. But Joe and I have known each other for forever, it seems like.
Maybe too long.
Fun twist. Joe actually wrote me in a story once. We were in an
Yes.
anthology for the
I
Earth
did.
Station 1 charity anthology.
Mhm.
I can't remember. Were you one of the ones who killed me, or was I just in yours?
You
'Cause
were
I-
just in mine, and
Because I think two of the other writers, because I was one of the hosts of the show, and two of the other writers decided to murder me in
Yeah.
those shores. You know?
in mine, each time you appeared, the other hosts thought that you were out on a book tour, but you
Yeah.
were always doing some secret project.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So that was fun. So yeah, so not only have we are we podcasting together, but yes, Joe has actually written my dialogue at times.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had you guys both on several times before, and you're right. The synergy between you two are really good, and that's part of the thing. I don't want to do a negative podcast. You guys always are jovial and fun, and I try to celebrate the joy of comics. You both bring a lot to the table. You're very meaty with the shows. I very much, especially Joe Crow, like bringing the three of you on to the show for the stuff. So we are going to be talking about today something that no longer exists, and I, as a fan, kind of miss it. It's those old print magazines from the 1970s that peaked in the 1980s. The Comic Reader, The Wizard, Amazing Heroes, Comic Buyer's Guide. So before we talk on, which of you guys, do you have a favorite one of those? Who was your favorite?
I was an Amazing Heroes guy.
That's a good one.
That one lasted longer than I think most of the others, but that one, I think the Comics Reader was one that I was into as long as it was around. But yeah, Amazing Heroes, I was able to get a Mile High Comics subscription, and Amazing Heroes just came to me just at various intervals.
How about you, Bobby?
Yeah, I started out reading things like Comic Scene, or I later discovered there was one called the Comic Reader.
Yeah,
It was more of a fanzine. It felt like, because it was cheaper. It was on like newsprint, and but had great interviews and great covers and things like that. I always enjoyed those type of magazines because they were more in depth.
So,
And I loved a good long form interview with creators.
yeah.
Comic. There was actually one called Comics Interview, which was
Yes.
big, deep, in depth interviews. Were like almost a whole issue sometimes. Or
I had a copy for the longest time of Comics Interview with a Kurt Busiek story that he wrote as a fan
Mhm.
about mutants in the Marvel Universe. And it was this long, very well researched article about the X-Men. And I found the back issue, and I'm looking at it, and I look at the author like, hey, I know who that is now.
I, through means I shall not divulge, have copies of almost every single one of those magazines, from Wizard to the Comic Reader to the Comic Journal, yada yada. I have all of them in my collection. In fact, I was putting an article together, and they were cited in back issues. So I went through my old thing. I was pulling these out so I could do them for research. And I wish somebody would take these things and put them like they would with Comic Book Plus and the old thing, for historical purposes and research purposes. Nobody's gonna make money off them, but there's a lot of great interviews and stuff, and all of these things, and they're just lost out there. That we don't have anymore. But before the internet, this is the only way that fans got news and interviews, and
it was the only way we got.
Yeah.
And the Comic Buyers Guide kind of acted like a forum almost, because it came out weekly. And you have all these letters going in, and a lot of debates and things, and the same thing with the Comic Journal. That's where fans communicate. And how do you think back then it was important for fans and to connect with the industry, or yourselves in particular? How important were these magazines to you and the fans back then?
Well, at the time, I didn't know anybody that read comics. I read comics, but I didn't know anybody else who did. So it was kind of a way to connect to other comic readers without actually connecting to them. I knew through these, hey, there are other people that dig these things I dig. So that was always cool. It was always cool to, once you started realizing, wait, there are people behind these things I love. And now I'm getting to know who the people are. And this was before I'd ever heard of conventions or been to conventions. Sometimes this was before comic shops were in my area.
Oh yeah.
This was my only way to touch like the greater comic landscape. Yeah. And so you realize then, hey, other people like this stuff too. And you kind of get into and start knowing, you get information on the books, which helps you discover books you've never heard of. Because when the newsstand, it was catch as catch can.
Right.
Not every newsstand or every spinner rack got the same books. So you would discover, wow, what's this thing I've never heard of? So yeah, so it was great for that.
And back in the 80s, there was we didn't know what the direct comics shop thing was until we found a direct comic shop.
Yeah.
And that's where we found these magazines. And sometimes, like the color magazines like Comic Scene, they'd be at, your drugstore magazine.
Because they're a more mainstream publication. And I have all those also. I have all the Comic Scene. That was nothing I'd forgotten about.
Oh yeah. And that and Starlog were the only ways we would get any info about movies or anything of that nature. And I liked them because they just the kind of breaking the fourth wall kind of stuff. And a lot of it that I gravitated to was original articles, like, historical stuff, of course. I loved, because there was no Wikipedia at the time. They would do deep dives into stuff I'd never read. And like, I remember there was a horror issue of Amazing Heroes, and they did this thing about the pre-Alan Moore Swamp Thing that I had no idea about, and it was just an issue by issue thing. And I was super into all that stuff. And there were, they would have cartoonists who would do, fun, like one panel joke things, and I loved all that stuff.
Yeah, I agreed. And those guys kind of became celebrities in their own right. Like, I would go to, when I started going to conventions, Starlog's editors were there as guests.
Cool.
That it was great to talk to people that were being published. I mean, they were on the other side. They weren't creating the comics, but they were still very important to the process of getting that information to people. Because could you imagine if we'd have had the internet in the 80s?
Ooh.
Some of the
if we had the internet in the 80s, you have to wonder if something like Crisis actually would have occurred because of all the fans.
Right. Yeah. Because a lot of times,
backlash.
a lot of times by the time we got the news in these magazines, it was technically out of date.
Yes.
It was already happening.
Yeah. We didn't. Yeah. So that's where the internet, I think, because that's why the internet killed a lot of these type of magazines. Because, you buy a magazine and you're reading an article, and it's like, well, the internet already debunked that like a month ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, but
we always got like Amazing Heroes did this giant, like TV Guide's preview issue every year, which was a must read. But Amazing Heroes did a big, like, omnibus size preview issue of all the comics from all the companies.
Everything. It was, the thing about Amazing Heroes is it came out every 2 weeks. It was the only one that came out every 2 weeks. And it was very long. It came from Fantagraphics, which also did the Comics Journal, which is the only one that's still running after all of these years.
Is it?
And
I did not know that.
I'm going to pause for a second because I know we'll go back to Amazing Heroes, but Joe was talking about the Comic Reader. That was one of the earliest of those fanzine type things. It was one of the longest running, and that was the I think it's the first one I ever picked up. And I remember where I picked it up because it was at the beginning of the comic shops when I was a kid. But there was this place where you could go get comic books. And I didn't have to ride my bike to different stores, which is a long haul, thumbing through the latest, pharmacy or Walmart or whatever. Looking, I hope this issue's here. This issue here. I go there and all these comic books are here. And I saw the Comic Reader, and I really liked that it was so amateurish. It looked like it was just Xeroxed and typed up and whatever. And it was really one of my favorite things. But Amazing Heroes was a really cool one because you had every 2 weeks you had those preview issues. And they really had a lot of good interviews in there. When Byrne, I remember when Byrne took over Superman, they had a huge section on the whole issue was about Superman.
I was going to bring that up because I knew nothing about. I knew that it was coming. That John Byrne was taking over. No, I don't know that I knew that. How would I have known that? But when
you probably read one of these magazines.
Yeah. When Amazing Heroes did this big layout, I remember my uncle, who was my comic book pal, well, he still is, but he was like, I don't know about this new Superman. Did you hear that Ma and Pa Kent are going to be alive? And turns out it was amazing. And that Amazing Heroes article with all the artwork that we had not yet seen, that sold him on it. And there we are. But it was this very long, in-depth article about all the the backstage shenanigans and the relaunch of Superman.
Yeah.
And,
And you
go on.
mentioned the comic reader too. To be such a technically a fanzine is the most collectible because they had artists do original covers.
Oh,
So the only place you could see that art was on those covers. So there's covers by like big name talent who was working at the time on those comic reader covers that never appeared anywhere else.
I feel like
So,
I remember
go on.
there's a comics reader where they did an article about, 1940s like golden age heroes, and an artist, and this is long lost. I have no idea where or who or anything, but they did like a Justice League satellite get together photo, like in
Yeah.
the JLA Jesse team ups, of like 40 something, golden age heroes, and I knew 12 of them. And so I just remember going, so much superhero things.
Mhm.
And so that was just, I think Comics Reader and Amazing Heroes, those are my two.
Yeah.
And then we have the Wizard, which came out in '91, and I'm not sure. Well, I think basically said that really Wizard changed everything because it was where creators actually started to become rock stars. You know what I mean?
Well, Wizard kind of took Wizard, like the magazines before that we've talked about were more here's the news. Wizard seemed to take inspiration from the gossip rags and the entertainment rags, and it wasn't just here's the news. Wizard was telling you who was popular. There's top 10 lists. Here's the top 10 writers. Here's the top 10 artists. These are the guys you should love. Like you said, turn them into rock stars.
And Wizard was on at every bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
Bright, colorful, shiny stuff, and it was I think the apex of the comics print magazine. But
also with original covers by big name.
Oh yeah, and they would even
and they also had the price guides in the back for the longest time. Also,
oh sure, what might have been the ruination of every young man's bank account.
Well, but, I think I hate to say it, but I really think Wizard, just as a magazine and the pricing in the back that updated, really helped contribute to the crash a few years later with the speculation market. I really think that Wizard is indirectly, not meaning to, was a direct contributor of, here's this hot comic, here's the latest hot artist, we're going to buy them. Because you guys remember when Death of Superman happened, because it was a slow media event, and everybody picked up on it, that DC was caught, flat-footed, and people are like, oh man, I'm going to buy some of these, and that's going to fund my kid's college education. And it's like, no, we don't do those things.
I worked part-time in a comic shop when that happened. And yes,
Bobby.
We had people were coming in, and it was a small town comic shop. And we had people coming in, and they were, this is gonna put my kids through college. And I'm like, it is not.
No.
I mean, I'm happy to sell them to you, but no, it is not.
No, I will take your money, but
but also too, it's I agree, because when you would go into comic shops, like it used to be, you could go in, and sometimes you could go in, and here's the last 6 months worth of an issue. You could
yeah.
Once the Wizards started having the price guides, I would notice comic shops would have one open by the register, and if you picked up something that wasn't brand new this month, they would flip through to see what the price was.
Ooh,
and yes. I think that hurt new people that come in, because when I got started at going to comic shops and discovering, that looks interesting, I could pick up multiple issues at cover price, get into it, and then but now if I go in and part 6 of a 6-part story is cover price, but all the others are $10 a piece,
I'm
not buying them, because I just don't have that kind of money. So I think, yeah, I agree. I agree that I think that kind of put more of a spotlight on, the monetary side of comics as
I
opposed to,
did, and um, we don't have to talk about Wizard. That may be like a whole other separate thing, but
Yeah.
I liked a lot of the. It was kind of like a comedy for 12-year-olds. Yeah, that a lot of it was, but it was deep, nerdy dives into things. So it was like comedy for 12-year-olds written by people my age, our age, and so there was some legit. There were some very funny things that they created, like a lot of cartoon strips or comic strips with action figures, which Toy Fair magazine is what sprung from that. But those were some of my favorite things. But
yeah.
Hey, there's somebody.
Hi, Ryan.
Cool.
Oh,
but
yeah, it's and I do remember. I don't remember which of the magazines of the 90s it was, because we ended up with 2 or 3. They were all kind of the similar, but they would have like artists teaching you how to draw. Here's how. So there was some good information that you could learn. These writers are talking about what it's like putting a script together. These artists are showing you how to draw. This month Adam Hughes shows you how to draw women. This month, this month George Perez shows you how to do a page layout, that kind of thing.
It seems like we're dogging the Wizard, but no, I really enjoyed the Wizard. It was something I got every week. It had a lot of cool features. It was very enjoyable.
Oh, yeah. And
I just wanted to point out there was a little bit of the downside on that.
It was a big deal at the time, though.
Oh, it was an amazing deal. And Wizard would even have they would debut comics.
Yeah. They would have
Marvel and DC would debut #1 issues amidst a Wizard magazine.
Yeah. Or they would have exclusives. I remember when the Hush, that Batman Hush, the big deal with Jim Lee and Jeff Loeb. There is a small chapter that appears in only 2 places: Wizard magazine and the trade paperback collections.
Oh, wow.
So if you didn't, the story works without it. It's an extra chapter. But if you were just reading the comics monthly, you didn't get that chapter. You had to pick up Wizard to get that chapter. So there was a lot of those kind of exclusives, and it was a big deal when you went in to get your comics. You looked for those magazines.
Oh yeah. I would spend more time reading Amazing Heroes and Comics Reader because the in-depthness, the thickness of the interviews, and as I was saying before, the comics history. For the longest time, I kept some poor enterprising soul, after original Crisis on Infinite Earths, put together a timeline of DC Universe continuity, and I kept that thing. I think I just finally screenshotted it maybe a couple of years ago, but I read through it, and I remember going, and it wasn't like anybody who worked for DC Comics, and I read through it again recently, and I'm like, invalidated immediately.
Yeah.
But bless this person for his research at the time, because it was just super nerdy. Like, well, clearly this happened in 1943. and I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. And just the notion, which is, I think Bobby will, it gave me the creative urge to write detailed, nerdy things, which I think both of you and I have been doing for many, many decades.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, what we're doing now is the modern equivalent, like with podcasts.
Yeah.
And video podcasts and things like this is kind of the modern equivalent of a lot of those magazines, because a lot of the stuff that was in the magazines was opinion, was commentary. and you were getting a lot of commentary by people that knew comics
Yeah.
or were comic fans or worked in the business and I think we've just kind of replaced paper with
The
doing it
interwebs.
digitally.
Yeah.
And so the spirit of those magazines lives on. I mean, there are websites. There are wow, Ryan's making me feel really good this morning about getting up early.
It's only because you paid him, Joe.
It's only because
you only paid him. We know how to say.
Yeah. So, well, I've been on his podcast before too. Ryan hosts the And I Quote channel, which does some really good stuff. You guys should check him out. So there's your plug. But yeah, the spirit of those type of magazines lives on, just in a new format.
Yeah.
And certainly, I know Joe and I see this at Dragon Con when we're both there, because there are a lot of panels and things that really have
all of
that
this
feel. Yeah, it's it's the equivalent of also finding the people that love that thing you didn't think anybody else loved. I've been on panels at conventions where I'm like, nobody's going to come to this thing.
Right.
Nobody cares about this topic we're talking about. And you get there and it's standing room only.
Yeah.
And you realize that there are a lot of people who love the same thing you love, and they want to talk about it, and they want somebody to talk about it.
That was what attracted me, what made me keep coming back to conventions at first, and what has led me down the awful path that I've been on.
The reason why we're taping this show is I want it to be a companion show to another show that I've taped and will go out at the same time with Andy Mangels. Now,
oh gosh, Andy Mangels wrote like 75% of Amazing Heroes.
Well, that's why I wanted to connect this together, and it was a fantastic taping. Let me make that clear. It was a fantastic taping. He was a great guest. Mm-hmm. He's going to come out the show again as soon as this show comes out. It's going to be great. Everything. But with all that being said, and I've done podcasting now for almost 5 years, it was the only show that I ever lost complete control of. He just tied me up, held me hostage. Because you guys know I like to put together show notes for all these shows here. And with Andy, I just kind of tossed them up, threw them in the trash, and just let that Energizer rabbit go and go and go and go. And we hit about the hour mark. I'm like, okay, Andy, we're done. I'll see you next time. Because if I didn't say, Andy, we're done, we'd be there all night doing that. But he got his start when he was 19, which, if you go back to like some of the early Bronze Age writers, like Jerry Conway got in when he was 19. I mean, from a geeky standpoint, you're 19 years old and writing Amazing Spider-Man, succeeding Stan Lee. I mean, anyway, that's a lot of weight on your shoulders. But again, he started at Fantagraphs at 19. He was in college. He was working on Amazing Heroes, and pretty soon he had all these columns going and all these bunch of stuff going on. Do you think fans can still enter the industry that way? And do you think that entry point for Andy Mangels was a good training ground?
I do. Well, you mentioned David Pepose earlier. Yeah. He started out doing reviews of comics, and that got him noticed by editors and helped him get in. I've heard him tell that story on podcast interviews. It's there are people who I'm blanking on names at the moment, forgive me, but there are people, I think Blake Northcott was one, started out doing comic news and things like that, and is now writing comics. And so you get
Gail
people.
Simone.
Gail Simone started out as writing articles. And so there's a lot of people that do that, and you kind of get noticed. And then you get opportunities that way. There's a lot of these days is a lot easier to get your information out there. So it's possible for anybody to do it. That also means there's a lot more noise to cut through. But people that are, it is doable. It's just a different way of doing it. Like in the old days, it was fanzines where you would type it up and photocopy it and staple it together yourself. And
hmm
now we just do that on the internet.
Yeah.
But it's still the same spirit. It's the same type of information. It's just a different way to get it out there. And I think
It's yeah, exactly. It's the medium has improved
Mhm.
really because Amazing Heroes and Comics Reader was what got a, by comparison, far smaller audience than today when you could write an article Amazing Heroes ish and potentially thousands of people
Mhm.
could,
Well,
could
and-
read it today.
and like this podcast will exist
yeah,
until the end of time.
Yeah.
Unless you take it down, it'll exist until the end of time. And it's also real time. Whereas things like Comic Scene or Wizard, print magazines, you had to work them months in advance.
yeah,
Yes.
So
Go on.
yeah, so a lot of that information by the time it reached the audience was out of date. These days you've got more of that instantaneous. Like if Joe made an announcement today of his new project, the world would know today.
now, yeah. But if
as
I made an
opposed-
announcement in Amazing Heroes, it would be a month and a half
yeah,
or 2 months
Yeah.
from now.
yeah, and by
Um,
that, and also by that time, the information could have gotten out other ways. So
Yeah.
it's not their exclusive anymore. It's
Exactly. And do y'all remember I remember the letters columns in Amazing Heroes because they kind of culled and edited in the mainstream comics letters pages. Although looking back in older comics now, they published a lot more negative
Yeah.
messages than I remember. But Amazing Heroes would just publish whatever came in. And there was this one guy who would always just send in article ideas. And it was really not so much ideas, just lists of characters.
Yeah.
And the Amazing Heroes editors would always respond with, "We did that one 30 issues ago. We're doing that one next month. We're not going to do that one." And it was just half the letters column was this guy just sending this giant list of things that he wanted to see. And at one point, I recall the Amazing Heroes people that, "Why don't you write this? You write these articles, dude." And that is how we ended up here, maybe. But
Oh, and speaking of letter columns, the number of people that wrote letters back then, who, like you mentioned, Kurt Busiek earlier, reading through my old comics and magazines,
yes,
I am astounded how often George R.R. Martin wrote letters to comics
Oh wow!
because he was a fan. This was before he was a writer. He was a comic fan, and so
Wow,
you start seeing people, and you're like, wait,
Yeah.
So yeah, those were it. So I guess that's a good way. Also, you were getting your name out there. You were getting noticed. You were spouting your opinions or whatever, but you're getting noticed, and yeah, that's half the battle in
Mhm.
what we do is getting noticed and not getting hated once you're noticed.
That's the thing, and what got me into, and I anytime you're into any hobby, you want to dig your fingernails into it. And if you were super into bowling, I'm sure there was a bowling magazine where you could talk about bowling, and for comics, the decades and decades of history before us, when we got there, Bobby and Ronald, all that stuff we didn't have access to,
Right.
but these magazines lured us in. These magazines were the gateway drug to us finding out about all that stuff that happened before we started.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It was first looks at photos from movies. It was first looks at covers. It was first looks at sketches, like at Superman. I remember issue you were talking about. I remember it was full of sketches of how Byrne wanted Superman to look.
Yes.
And there was a lot. It felt like insider info.
It's saying, yeah. Because all my nerd friends who weren't reading it, I would be like, Oh yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
John Byrne.
I know something.
So, all of them are all gone except for the Comics Trail, which still comes out. Blizzard folded in 2011. The Comic Fire Guy lasted the longest. It folded in 2013. Last question for both of you. What do long-term fans who used to have those things miss? And would newer fans appreciate these magazines if they were around today? Or it's just really no long-term viability for such a magazine?
I think
Go ahead, Jim.
well, the internet in a lot of ways has replaced all the things you could get from such magazines, but the big glossy interviews, like I've gone honestly around the interwebs in the last, a while, looking for the kind of long form comic book review analysis. There isn't. But, I mean, maybe it's somewhere, and please tell me because I'm looking. But a lot of people in those magazines, you would get a monthly feed of that kind of thing, and now you don't have that. And it can always come back in digital form, and someone can keep doing this kind of thing, and they will. Because there's so much to write about. I mean, comics now is not just, and hasn't been, the top two. There's a bazillion comics coming out at all times on the web, physically, and everywhere else. And I love it. But the only way I'm going to know about it is publicity and other people digging their fingernails into it like I would want to.
Yeah, I think.
Give us your final thoughts, Bobby.
Yeah, I agree. The internet has made it so it's easier to reach a large audience quicker, and there's multiple ways of doing that. I do think one of the things we've lost is because of that is the specialness of these things. Everything's at my fingertips right now when I want it, which is awesome. But there was also, I remember that excitement of going to the comic shop to get these things.
Yeah.
To go pick up these magazines, that it was, I'm going to sit down for an hour on Saturday morning and read this magazine. It was a special, it was kind of like when we were a kid, the ABC Sunday night movie was a special thing for us.
Yeah.
Whereas now I can watch a movie whenever I want. I don't have to go wait for it. And I think that we've lost some of that. We're just used to, I need this information, I can get it. We've lost some of that. Ooh, this is special because. But I mean, the information is all still out there. There are people like I said, instead of doing long form interviews in magazines, we're doing long form interviews on podcasts.
Yeah.
Or, so a lot of the same stuff is happening, just in a different way.
Bobby, Jill, thank you so much for joining me on the History Podcast. I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
I can do that too, yeah.
All right, guys, how'd that go for you? All right with that?
That was good.
Yeah.
You good?
That was fun. Yes.
We're going to go straight to the Black Lightning. Actually, while we were talking, I got an email from Isabella too, which I'll talk about when we start the show. I'm just gonna keep you guys. Everybody else knows who the hell you guys are by now, and just saves the time. So, but I'll let you guys say hi and all that good stuff. So, this will go on the other one will go on the history. This will go on the regular show. Here we go. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I have two.
I apologize. I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna step away for a few minutes. Y'all.
No, every step is wait, and we can go pause for a second. It doesn't matter, and we'll come back and take a second.
Yes.
Are you staying, Bobby? Or are you leaving?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, I'll continue talking with you. Go.
We'll be right. We will kibitz while you're gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk amongst yourselves. I'll
Yes.
give you a topic.
Okay, go on there. I'll come back.
So, how is the live experience working for you so far, Ron?
I'm glad we only had a couple of people, which is fine. Now that I know that I have to schedule through like StreamYard, as a green room and then bring everybody in, that's fine. Now I know how to do that. The other thing is over here on my side over here, I got the comments that guy nicely was commenting, which is good to know, because I'm adjusting whatever. And, it's like, I was thinking, well, down the road, I'm doing Titan later in the month or other people, to multitask everything is very interesting to do. But it's working out so far fine. I'll feel better when I'm done and I've got the hard copy and it's down on my hard drive. I was putting the shows together in a while. I had this podcast studio was all messed up. It took forever to get it back together. It's fine now, but I had files all over the place in different cloud drives, and transferring from A to B didn't work in some of the areas. And I had taped about a month or so ago, the Energon universe with the guy from Image Comics. And I'm like, I thought I had the tape. Oh my God, where the hell's that tape? And I'm like, oh, don't tell me I lost that tape. Damn, I found the tape eventually, but yeah. And when you read that letter later, I'm putting shows out on Monday and Wednesdays now, basically, for the most part. My editing software with G-Script, even though I banned you almost, it's really easy, Bob, because what it does is it will bring up over here. It'll bring up your guys' stuff, what we have right now. It will bring up transcript, like Word document, okay? And with a click of a mouse, it'll take out all the filler words, all the the ahs and the ohs. And it'll then edit for clarity, which is when you go back in 1984, no, I mean 1985, it'll take back at 1984 stuff out. And all the bullshit that we're talking now, it'll say, do you want to flag that too? So most episodes, when it's just like me and David Kapos, that's really easy to do. Because it's just, when I got three people there and the odds and the yoga and whatever. And a lot of times when I'm editing, I take out stuff that could be, because it's about you guys. Because as you see, I just skip back and just let you guys go. And if I'm ranting like I'm doing now, I will literally cut myself out. But I taped Kitson yesterday. I have so many people that I'm taping and dealing with in England right now. It's amazing. But I taped Kitson for the Wade Legion show. And Kitson's coming back on again. Had I not broke my leg, he would have been taped on me. But one of the things I want to do is bring creators on to talk comics. Instead of coming in and talking. And Kitson, for example, likes to talk comics. Okay. So, and I want to keep, God, you two it's hard with you two, because you two just fucking go on and on and on. Because I'm trying really hard to do a short form podcast overall. Okay. Even with Kitson, it was like less than a half an hour. Okay. I wanted media in and out because it's just too much competing for fans' attention. The internet. There's all these podcasts. There's this and that, and I really don't think fans are going to sit there. I don't know who you are for an hour podcast unless you're like word balloons. You know what I mean? So Kitson's going to come back in a couple months. He's going to talk about one of his favorite titles, The Legion of Superheroes. That's something I would like to do more of.
Well, I like the way too that you do kind of like what you're doing here with, like when you interviewed Chuck Patton, and then you did a review episode of books that Chuck worked. Those are great companion pieces, I think.
I
like.
Yeah. Okay.
And I like the way you're doing that, and it kind of, you know, shows both sides, you know, and gives you not only meet the creator, but gives the information on the creator's work. So I enjoy that. So welcome to the Bobby Nash Show. Now that everybody's gone, shh. That'll be a nice surprise for Ronald when he comes to do editing. I'm just taking over. I can ruin another episode. That joke will land later. But thanks to everyone for being here. We're gonna come back and do another one here in just a minute. So yeah, fun stuff. I feel like it's hard to kibitz by myself. So yeah, so that'll be a yes. So. I left you some fun editing out bits while I.
Yeah, oh, good. You know, Joe's been gone so long, you and I could have taken another show together. But no, seriously, you're right. That's what I'm trying to do is more companion show.
Yeah.
Like I had George Papp that I taped with the guy last year. We talked about George Papp, which is fine. But if I would have brought 2 or 3 people on talking about George Papp, that's more bang for the buck. You know what I mean?
Right.
So with the George Papp show, I took and paired that up with the Legion of Superheroes show that I had a solo show. Excuse me. Because on the other back end of things, because I got my first comics column news. Okay. And a lot of times I'll take 2 or 3 columns there and turn them into a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote several articles in the last week or so about Tomorrow's publishing. I have a plan I'm doing with the Tomorrow, and I did several columns with Tomorrow's, and then I'm gonna put them all together to a Tomorrow show solo. You know, so I got that, you know, stuff to work in too. And some of this I'm trying to get some. That's why I lost David Petlos' email, and I'm like, you know what? I know where his social media is, you know. And I wasn't friends with him on Facebook, and so when he was here, he's over there. Hey, liked and reposted everything, so he remembered me, and I reached out to him. He goes, "Oh yeah, here's my email. I'll love to come back on the show." I'm like, "Oh good," and it's kind of so I'm like, when I got Jimmy Palamonte and David Peppo, both from Mad Cave, so now I got, you know, 2 new Mad Cave things going on, but it's for the most part it's okay, but sometimes when I'm taping, you know, when I first started the podcast, it was just me, and I started bringing on more voices, and then I found a way to bring in creators. You know, I've had Daryl Banks on my show one way or the other, like 4 times or something, you know, and Barry Kitson and Maggot. And one of the funny jokes is I sold my soul to the devil, and somebody forgot to tell me because I've been so blessed with all these, you know, A-list creators. But on the back end, it's not a bragging right. It's when I bring on some of these indie people, you know, for the Presents, which is my indie podcast, whatever. That builds the awareness. So like last time I did a bunch of Superman shows last summer, and had Kitson, Magan, Keith Williams, the inker, and then brought out some indie creators and had them talk about Lois Lane. You know, so if you're gonna listen to Magan or Kitson, you'll stick around with some of these smaller guys, and everybody gets the big bang in the buck type of thing. You know, so ideally, if I had another person, it'd be, hey, I'm Joe Blow from Acme Comics, and here's my latest comic book, and I can plug you in. You know, that's the marketing thing I'm trying to get for these creators. But when I send out a lot of emails, I get crickets.
Yeah.
And shows can't wait. So, but you know, as I'm bringing these names up, it's some. I think maybe I'm getting used to it, but I don't know if it's like with you, but it's like. Well, here's a great example. You know, Ray McKay is my 22-year-old kid who's doing shows, right? You know, and I'm like, you want to do Daryl Banks at the time? And he's like, what? You give me Daryl Banks? And Jim's up. Conan, what? Why are you giving me these? Like, well, first off, I've already done Daryl a few times, and I'll probably have Daryl on. He was really going to do Barry Kitson, but his college got in the way. And part of this is he's an indie writer. He's got several stories published. He's got another one coming out soon. Giving him some of these creators is like a mastercraft in storytelling. I mean, just think you're a 22-year-old punk kid. He's not a punk kid. Sitting down and talking storytelling with Jim Zub.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or David Wohl from Xenoscope. You know, and that's part of it. But the other thing is he's 22, so some of these names that he might get, he doesn't recognize the importance of them.
Right.
But one day he can sit back and go, well, I know Daryl Banks. I know Jim Zub. You know, that fanboy thing. So I brought all that up because it's not so much now, but it's kind of like the fanboy. It's like, because, you know, I try to be serious, but it's like, oh my God, I got this guy. Oh my, you know, I'm a fan. You know,
yeah,
you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, sometimes that's hard. Yeah, because I've interviewed when I used to co-host a podcast years ago. We would interview people, and yeah, there's that little voice sometimes because you're trying to be professional, but then there's that little voice in the back of your head going, "Oh my God, you're talking to."
Yes, you know, and it's strange. It's also strange to be on a first name basis with these people.
Yeah.
You know, it's no longer Mr. Zub, Mr. Kitson. Hey Barry, how you doing? You know, and it's kind of surreal that I'm just a nobody, small fish in the pond. You know, and it's funny because I've been trying to get Barry on, and I got his wife into the, things. And now we've worked out a system where she works as the middle person back and forth, and we've done that a few times.
Honey, go here. Here's where you need to be.
Right.
Because, hey, as a creator, I understand. Sometimes I need people saying, go here.
She's a very nice lady. We've joked about a lot of stuff, but, and I've been trying to nail Kitson for a while. And the problem is, how do you balance that fine line between being a nagging pest?
Mm-hmm.
I'll just give you Kitson, for example, I've been trying to get him nailed down for a couple months, and it's I go out of my way to respect and work around creators.
Mm-hmm.
They've got writing deadlines, they got this. Well, Jim's up. We made sure that worked around his schedule because I understand they're busy. So it's that fine line of Bobby Nash, for example, is a comic book writer. Yeah, I'm going to come on your podcast. How many times do I text you, without being a pest and a nuisance, or how far do you, chase that lead, to get a person on a ship, and that type of thing. And this has happened more than one time with me. I will just blindly go off and just reach out to somebody, okay?
Yeah.
Hey, you want to come on the show? And a few times I just don't do my initial research, and I'll get someone and go, that's a lot bigger than I thought it was. I snag somebody. I'm like, well, shit, what am I going to do now? Then I start getting, I didn't realize. I'll give you a perfect example. Gary Carlson of Big Bang Comic Book. Okay, mm-hmm. He was a guest on my first anniversary show, number 75, and I reached out. Like, this is the godfather of Image Comics. He helped discover a lot of these big names, creators, and they, and his stuff. And at first, I was kind of intimidated, and I've done that a few times. Like, oh, this is a big star. Even Jimmy, Jimmy Palamonti, now I put his name. Mm-hmm. Yes, I recognize the name. Do I necessarily read everything he comes out and have? No, because I only got so many times, so much in the day to read. Every week, because of the stuff that I do, every comic book that comes out, except for DC and Marvel, I get PDFs every week, and I use them for review purposes. And I try to work them in, and there are so many I just can't read. I don't have the time. In fact, I have been so focused on getting the podcast that I got all these comics and stuff there to be read that I haven't had time to read. And Ray was like, I recognize the name, but what's this? So I went to the Wikipedia and just, did a little section, and I looked at it and I'm like, oh, like, I forgot how famous Jimmy was, but he's agreed to come on the podcast. And I was texting. And here's the other thing. There's only so much of me. There's only so many shows that I can put out. Okay. But how do you say no to Jimmy coming on a show?
Yeah.
How do you say no to this person?
Yeah.
How do you say no to that person? Bringing them on a show.
Yeah, and it's different too, because sometimes you get, I remember like in my interviewing days, you would get, you get some creators that people to interview, and no problem. You ask them a question, they're off and running, and then you get those people that every answer is a yes or no answer, and it's like dragging information out of them. So it's a big balancing act sometimes how to how to make that work.
Here's the other thing, and I find it uncomfortable, and I find a fine line on how to do that, of how not to impose on your good graces. Okay, let's say this person, okay, because you're a writer and you work with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just use Daryl Banks. Daryl Banks in the past. I'm going to give exact. I'm going to give the real example. I was doing Kickstarter and I read a podcast at the time, and I had this one guy on a few times, and he's a lawyer in Pennsylvania. And you would think if you had a game show and you said independent comic creator, worked with Ron Maj, Daryl Banks, Keith Champagne, the lawyer from Philadelphia would not be on your top list.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was doing some Kickstarter, and I knew the next Kickstarter was there, and he's like, I knew he had Daryl Banks lined up, and Keith Champagne, and Ron Mars, and he offers out of the blue, would you like to do a live show with these guys? I'm like, what? So that was my first major guest on the show. But at the same time, how do you reach out to a guest like Oliver from the old musical back in the 60s? Begging them, can I have some more, please? Can you give me a link? You know what I mean? It's a fine line between, infringing on a friendship and getting that email to somebody to do a taping for a show. And I have that fine line of not wanting to step on toes. Right. I know this person knows that person. And the other thing, when I bring a guest on, we'll just use Daryl Banks, who co-created Kyle Bradner. He's been in the industry since the 90s, okay? Or, how do you come to Ron Mars? Everybody knows Ron Mars. How do you come up with talking points that they haven't necessarily repeated verbatim like Ben Stein for the last 30 years? I try to come up with unique talking points that they don't necessarily ever get to talk about in the past. And that's one of the things that I do.
It is always interesting because I'll get that sometimes. It's like, oh wow, I've never been asked that before.
Well, and as you know, I try to come up with good talking points ahead of time. I do a lot of research, and I've been relying a lot on AI for a lot of things. Okay, but when I say AI, it's like a template.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I can go, and I did this even for this show. I'll go with different AI. We're doing a podcast on this topic for this length of time. This is the parameters. Give me some questions. Okay, and they'll give me questions. Here's the header. Here's the question, and I won't cut and paste verbatim. I could, but I won't. I use that as a template, and then I rearrange the talking points, and send them out.
Because sometimes with the AI, you've got to verify too, because I got one where Google's AI thought that the character on that TV show 911, Captain Bobby Nash, wrote my novels. Because it was like Bobby Nash, played by Peter Krause, wrote the novels and started listing off my novels. And I'm like, well, that's wrong.
You know,
Yeah.
and I don't, not everybody do talking points. And the reason about doing a talking point is I want the guest to shine. I don't care who you are, and I want you to prepare to do whatever answers you want. And the last thing I want is somebody up there stuttering and wondering like Albert Fudd. And I remember when I had John, and sometimes I do the talking points because it's hard to gauge. And I realized today that make a note to self. When you have Joe Crow and Bobby Nash cut down the talking points, you'll never get to the end.
Yeah.
And when you bring on somebody like Andy Mangels again, because we were talking about in another podcast, Andy Mangels was on the show. And he just took over the show. When you get Andy Mangels on, don't worry about the talking points. And sometimes, and Bobby, you and I have done this with Joe Crow, and I've done this a couple other times with people that I know, is not even do the talking points. We can just do cold shows because I have knowledge. And I don't like to, and with you, I like to bring in a lot of comic historians.
Hey, he's back.
Now he's not. Joe, don't say a word. Pipe down. Don't say a word for a few minutes. But I like to bring on the comic book historians because you guys bring meaty stuff to the show, and that's what I want. I want you guys to prepare. John Morrow, when I had him on last year for my Budget Team Morrow show, he was very impressed. He goes, I really appreciate you doing that. Another case, I really appreciate you doing that. A lot of people don't do their research. And a lot of times I will send them off and there'll be corrections. Is this what you like? Is this what you want? Because a lot of times I bring, you guys don't count. Bobby doesn't count. A lot of times I say, Bobby, let's do this. Instead of Bobby wants to do that, because I have a list of things I want to do, but a lot of times I'll have the guest pick the top. Because we were talking, I had Barry Kitson on coming up, and Barry wants to come back on the show again and talk Legion of Superheroes, which I think is cool. Instead of having Barry talking about his work, talking about his favorite things, so we'll come up with talking points and do all that stuff with Barry Kitson later. But it gives the creators a chance to update and change and whatever. But Bobby, before we kind of wrap this little thing about creators and things, do you have anything you want to final thoughts?
No, nothing really. Just that I enjoyed doing this, and thank you so much for having me and bringing me back.
Because we decided to do a little impromptu talking about creators and stuff. So Bobby, I don't know when this is going to go out because this is the second show we've ad-libbed. The other one was the 250th show, which you named Bobby Nash. It was the show. That was a pain to edit. And this particular segment that we're doing is the middle of 3 segments. So I am just going to die editing this. So Bobby,
well, I think too, when you get guys like me and Joe who have done hundreds of these type of things, you kind of just
don't you say a word.
Yeah, you can go. Like, I remember, this will be my final thought. I'll tell you a little quick story. I was supposed to be on one podcast, and at the last minute, the other guest had to cancel. And the host contacted me and says, oh my God, I am so sorry. I don't know how we're going to fill the time. And I'm like, I can do an hour. No problem.
I've done that with a lot of people. Bobby Nash, thank you for joining me for this little impromptu talking about meeting creators, interviewing creators, and all that stuff. Thank you, Bobby.
My pleasure.
So, Joe, we just pulled a Bobby Nash. We were talking about creators and stuff. And so I kind of segged it into another show that we can run talking about creators and interviewing them and all that type of stuff and whatever. So that'll work someday about something. So we are getting ready to do the last part with Isabella. So that's why I didn't want you to talk to Miss Joe, because it was my AI. It was just like I told Bobby there, when I had like me and Barry on, the shows are really quite easy to edit. Even with 3 people, it's not that hard. but I'll pull the video off air later, and I'll put it up on my software. And with the click of the mouse, it'll take out all the filler words, all the the ohs, the ooms, and whatever, like that. I don't necessarily have to do that, but it makes everybody look good. And I want my guests to shine. The other thing that it does is it edits for clarity. So Joe or Bobby says, well, it's just like I did. I said Joe and then Bobby, it'll cut that Joe part, whatever. So I can put shows out, 3, 4, 5 shows in a week, because editing not you guys. You guys are a fucking nightmare. I swear to God, you guys. I mean that nicely, but the great thing. But if I'm taking kids in, which was like 20, 25 minutes, I can edit and get the show done in about half an hour, 40 minutes. And like I told the kid Ray, I said, because he's getting ready to do more taping, and he went to WonderCon, so he has more leads and stuff. So I'm like, moving forward, your shows with the research that you do and taping should take you no more than an hour to 90 minutes total, period. Because if you're spending more time than that, you're doing something wrong. And I know you had some really cool guests on it, the time frame, but even like Kitson and somebody might bring David Pepples back on. Those are like 20, 25-minute shows. That's just the thing. The history thing, whatever. And you guys are good to do, but too many of those 2-hour shows, 45-minute shows. I look at YouTube and somebody's talking about something for like the next hour. Like, really? It's like, who's going to sit there and watch all that? I don't have time to read the comics I have every week, let alone listen to 1,000 podcasts and YouTube stuff. I got a whole shit of stuff on my TV to watch on the TV. I don't have time to watch TV shows. So I don't, unless you're doing word doodles, nobody's going to sit there for 2 hours and listen to you. All right, we're going to do this. All right.
Yes, let's talk some Black Lightning.
We're going to do Black Lightning. So here we go. Welcome back to the show. I have 2 returning guests, Bobby Nash and Joe Crow. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Today, we're diving into Black Lightning, a.k.a. Jeffrey Pierce. It's Tony Isabella's creation from the 1970s. I have recently taped Jenny Blake Isabella, former Tony Isabella, and it's a really great taping. And from my standpoint, I really feel kind of bad because that show was sitting there for a little bit of time, not as long as I wanted, but I just didn't want to throw that show out because Isabella was a great person of comic books. They did a lot of stuff back in the 70s. And I wanted to do a background in the history of Black Lightning, and I'm actually going to do another solo show to go with this. So let's talk about Black Lightning. It was about in 1976 when DC was developing a character called the Black Bomber. It was a white racist who turned into a black superhero under stress. That's an interesting concept back then. I cannot see that flying today at all.
No.
There's no way that could ever happen. But Isabella had written Luke Cage at Marvel, and he revised that pitch, which eventually became Jefferson Pierce, Black Lightning. It was a teacher, Olympic athlete who worked, I think it was originally in Gotham, or was it Metropolis? He originally worked, I think it was in Metropolis, doing that. So what do you think that they actually made Black Lightning back then kind of like a working class Joe, because if you look at some of the heroes, you have the billionaires and the this and the that, and outside of his lightning power, he was just a normal kind of guy. I mean, was that kind of unique for a character back then? Either one of you can talk about that.
Certainly unique to DC. Marvel did that sort of thing a lot. Like Peter Parker is pretty, they weren't rich guys. DC, that was kind of unique for them because most of DC's characters either had these big careers or were just wealthy or, so having like a working class guy was a bit unique for them. And I love the fact that he was a teacher. I thought that was an interesting, way to go for a superhero.
They when I first encountered Black Lightning, now if I'm not mistaken, didn't he have like a solo series which was quickly canceled?
Yes, he had
They
a
adopted him
series back in
into-
'77. It
So he-
was, I think, like 10 issues, maybe 11.
Yeah.
But then it got caught up in the DC implosion.
Right.
I'll briefly, for fans who don't know, I'm going to quickly tell them. This is a time when DC is going through great change. They had this new initiative called the DC Explosion. They rapidly expanded their line of comic books. They added more pages. It was 50 cents. And like a couple of months into it, the higher ups gutted DC, canceled a lot of the titles. Back then, you didn't have the synergy that you had between the comic books and the higher ups.
Mhm.
You know, they were bean counters who just thought of comic books as an afterthought, which in a lot of ways, that's what comic books are today in the big corporate structure. It doesn't really matter if DC or Marvel makes a profit or how much they really do make, because in the rounding, it doesn't matter. They're rounding numbers in these great big structured companies. You know, if for example, if Marvel made a profit, big profit, or made a big loss in a given year, it's a drop in Disney's bottom line. It doesn't even really register. It's more than for the IP properties. Back in the '70s, there was a lot of things that had gone on. There were some things that like distribution problems. There was no comic shop. There was bad winters where comic books didn't get distributed. There were things like recessions where money was tight. So again, DC went through and just slashed all these lines. And Black Lightning was a victim of that. And I believe the last issue was part of something called Comics Cavalcade, where they took all these issues and the copyright trademark, put it into this big omnibus. Some of those stories have been reprinted, some of them haven't, still extremely rare, and that's how Black Lightning got canceled. I think it canceled because it got canceled because the higher ups at Warner at the time just did not like that. I do not want to exactly go too much into creator rights. I'm just going to acknowledge the creative team. You know, it was written by Isabella. Trevor Van Eden was the artist involved, and there was a battle over creator rights and compensation that went on for a while. I'm just stating the information, and while we were getting ready to tape this, I did get an email from Isabella that said basically, I am not the co-creator of Black Lightning. I am the creator. And Trevor is the co-creator. He goes, Tony Isabella made it completely clear that that's the way it is said. And so I respect it. That's fine. So I made sure that we acknowledge that for the taping. And because creator rights is just a whole nother podcast. And I'm glad creators get acknowledged, but it doesn't change the fact that for DC in 1977, Black Lightning was a major departure from what DC was putting out. Would you guys agree?
Yeah. And such a visually cool looking, really at the time, the only cool costumes were in the Legion of Superheroes. Because they, like, Mike Grell, maybe, I think was the main artist back then. I mean, he went, and Dave Cockrum, like, anyway. But what I'm saying is, there was nobody else had a costume like Black Lightning.
Oh.
And it was, in retrospect, very 70s with the high collar and the
big
V.
Yeah.
But I dug it, man. And I first saw Black Lightning after his book was canceled, when he did the rounds of the team up books. And the fact that he was in Metropolis, but in the bad part, that allegedly Superman never, I'm sure, look, if something happened, Superman would be there. But the notion that there was the over the tracks and at Metropolis, there wasn't anybody day to day, and Black Lightning was that guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was the same. I was born in 71, so when the book came out, I was quite young. But I discovered Black Lightning much later, like kind of like you, but I think the first time I really noticed Black Lightning was when he was in The Outsiders.
Yes,
With Batman and The Outsiders. That was kind of where I first discovered him. Although I also remember Black Vulcan from Super Friends, and I was convinced they were the same guy.
Yeah.
But yeah,
there was a story there, wasn't there?
Yeah, that it was. If Black Lightning had been in Super Friends, they would have had to have paid Isabella.
Yeah, yeah.
And corporate greed. I mean, like I said, that could be a whole other show.
Yeah.
Of them doing things to, I've seen multiple examples of we'll change one little thing so we don't have to pay that person.
Mm-hmm.
But The Outsiders is where I first really got to know the character and working with Batman and the rest of the Outsiders. And I dug the character. I thought the character was cool. Later got to see him, get solo adventures again. And the character has pretty much remained part of DC. I don't know if they're doing much with him. I don't know what they're doing with him today, but I know he's had several iterations.
He's been a long-term legacy character that has been a constant at DC since the. Now, all three of us are of a certain age. We've been collecting comics for a long time, so our knowledge of creators is quite good. But creators get lost in the shuffle over time. Mm-hmm. Golden Age, Silver Age, whatever, and it's just just what it is. So I've done shows like on Bob Brown, Steve Gerber, I just this thing on George Papp, and they're just little things that these guys were important. I've done several pieces on Stan Goldberg, who I call the other Stan, because he was so significant in Marvel during the 1960s because they had no colorist credits back then. And among the things that he did is he did a lot of the coloring. So if you look at a lot of the Marvel covers back then, that was because of Stan Goldberg. And Stan Goldberg did a lot of Millie the Model that went on to Archie. And I like to remind fans that before, no shade on those creators, before Kirby and Lee and Ditko and Spider-Man and all that, the bread and butter of Atlas and Marvel were the Westerns, the war, the romance, the Millie the Model, the Two Young Kid. And I forget the guy who offhand who did the one Western for 10 years. There's Marie Severin, who's another one that I've done about. And I bring all this up because Isabella during the 70s at DC and Marvel, particularly at Marvel, was a huge writer making significant contributions back in the 70s. Comments, Joe?
In reading older, I've kind of gotten into a 1970s Marvel kick, going back into my Avengers and my Defenders and 2-in-1 and team ups, and I see Tony Isabella everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he's one of the Isabella is one of the formative comics writers of all the things that I read at the time. Mm-hmm. And I only knew the Black Lightning stuff retrospectively. At the time, I didn't recognize that it was the 70s. At the time, I didn't really key into how important Isabella was to there was so much that he added to. Had I known at the time, but I know now, so I can go back and find Isabella's stuff. But there's always there, Isabella.
I want to make a quick comment to Bobby on my two thoughts. people talk about like the Jerry Conways, the Steve Gerbers, and the Englehart, and and Maxwell doesn't get as much credit as he should either. And to me, Isabella falls into that same thing. Isabella may not have wrote the Defenders and Gerber, or may not have done an Avenger or a Defender or Avengers run, all that other stuff. But Isabella's contributions were such huge things that continue to ripple through today. Bobby, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, because a lot of times, especially back in those days, with the exception of a few people, you could be the biggest name in comics, and that doesn't mean anything to the world at large. But I also think, and yes, we've seen that with a lot of creators. They kind of fade out and just kind of disappear. I think what has helped Isabella is two things. I think has helped the internet, because a big presence on social media, out there talking and promoting and doing and cons, and that helps. Also, I think the Black Lightning TV show was a big factor in shining a spotlight on those creators who created the comic, and because they both appeared in an episode. So there were being interviewed, and so I think those things kind of help put them back in the spotlight. And then social media, people, I forgot about these people, and now I'm following them to social media and I'm getting to know them that way. And Isabella is very active on social media, responds to people, interacts with people, so approachable. That I think that has helped. And we've seen that with a few of the creators that have embraced that are kind of getting that second or third wind, because people are like, oh, I loved reading your stuff as a child, and then I forgot about it. And, now it's fun to reconnect, and it's I love that. I love that about seeing creators that are getting that kind of rebirth.
Yes. Marvel in the 1970s was kind of a weird place for a lot of reasons. They were notorious for missing deadlines, reprint issues, and right.
Here's one we had, and they would. I don't mean to interrupt it, but in reading these comics, like as this is very fresh for me, because they would interrupt the middle of the storyline, and they would always tell you so much inside baseball stuff in the letters columns. They were like, we had this story sitting in a drawer, and we needed to go to physical print that day. And so that's why you're seeing what you just read.
Yeah, because in the newsstand days, you had to ship something.
Yeah,
it's not like now where you can go, this book's going to take 3 months. No problem.
We're going to delay it for another 3, 4, 5 months.
Or just let Jeff Johns finish it whenever.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. What's that?
I was reading this Avengers Omnibus, which was a collection of some of the epic Marvel Masterworks things. So some of the introductions appeared in this. Omni is right around that that area there when Wonder Man came back and Kirby came back to Marvel. And some of these introductions, you get this nice idea of microcosm of what Marvel is like back at that time, And one of the things that I remember, it's also in this Omni, was Avengers 150. Okay. Now, Marvel didn't do a lot with the big anniversary issues, but 150 at the time was supposed to be the new Avengers lineup. And because of deadline thing, the whole chunk of the issue was a reprint. And I
just read that very issue.
And one of the other things I have fun about, and it's terrible to be this way, and no shade on Marvel or these people involved, but when I'm reading chunks of those things, I'm like, oh, look, that person was editor-in-chief at this time, a little bit longer. Oh, look, there's that person editor-in-chief, because between Roy Thomas and Jim Shooter, I won't give all the names, there was all these editors-in-chief that basically like, I'm done, I'm good. Let's go move on. So Marvel had all these issues going into it, and I had a couple reasons why I brought all this up. And I really wanted to do a show one day on Bill Mantle, but he was considered at the time wrote more Marvel characters than even Stan ever did, because they considered him the fill-in king. Because whenever they needed something overnight, and that's when so many people broke in, when they needed something literally written overnight, man, I'm good. I got this, no problem. I'll get this for you. And I bring this up because Mantle is very professional. Right? You know, he doesn't seem like he ever missed a deadline or whatever. And Isabella, who was a writer and editor during the 70s, was very professional. Got steady assignments, had the trust of the editors. People relied on him, didn't miss deadlines, which for Marvel at the time was kind of important because, you know, if you're missing the deadline for, you know, Avengers 150, the reprint. Now imagine, you know, even imagine in the 80s if something like that happened, like the Amazing Heroes and the fan press, how they would just eat Marvel alive over the reprint of the 150. But back then, us fans didn't have a choice. But you know, and that's, people don't realize that Isabella was such a, you know, one of the people you can count on, and that was so important for Marvel. And the scripts were really good that Isabella wrote over time. And people don't, you know, the scripts, the dialogue, you know, all that type of stuff, you know, he really got the street level, Black Lightning, you know, Luke Cage, and, you know, I think at one time when I was a really young kid, I almost thought that Isabella, because when Black Lightning came out, it was probably 10 years ago, I'm probably sure at one time I thought Isabella was a black person because of the black characters that Isabella wrote that sounded like real characters, you know. And Joe mentioned this about reading comic books back then. Fans should go back and read comic books from all the eras because there's great stories there. For the first time in my life, I'm reading the JSA Golden Age stuff. I'm going, wow. I'm you know, I've read comic books for 40 years, and I'm like, there's always so much time. I'm like, oh, these are pretty good. And I say that because the Isabella 70s and a lot of the Bronze Age, that stuff holds up over time. What do you guys think?
Well, you also have to, yes, I agree. I think people should read the older stuff. But you also, like, if you give 70s comics to someone who's a kid today, there's context.
Yeah.
Some things, you know, obviously times have changed, tones have changed. I think we mentioned earlier, this story would never happen today. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of stuff people have to realize that when they read older stuff, that it doesn't reflect current norms. And sometimes with especially younger readers who they've grown up reading this stuff, now you give them something older. It is, context is king. What the 70s were like impacted what was written in Black Lightning. And if you don't have that frame of reference, some of the stuff will seem odd. But that said, they're still good stories. You can still read them and get a very entertaining stories from them. But context is king. I mean, in any era, you know, the 60s, the 90s, oh my God, the 90s comics. Some of them are hard to read unless you remember what the 90s were like.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's back when everything was extreme.
You mentioned the 90s, and I was reading a X-Men omnibus, I believe, and it was right in the mid-90s. And I'm like, you look at this, and you can see this is comic books in the mid-90s. And it was like across the whole Marvel thing that has a certain feel to it. Joe, you know that Marvel and DC always constantly churn out characters, especially saying there were a lot of Bronze Age characters, some come and go. But Isabella's Black Lightning, to me, seems like an anomaly that actually stood up decades later. What about Black Lightning makes it still a good character today?
I Black Lightning is in two of my favorite issues of comics, and it was in the Justice League, where he holds up because of the he's not a scientist. He had a dude develop all his gimmicks and all of his equipment, and there's that, but also it's not just that, it's I guess that's interesting. You shouldn't have to compare him to Black Panther or anything like that, but I think Black Lightning was one of those guys who everybody remembered, but nobody did anything with for years. But those of us who we always, I think, had and it might have been a kind of a combo package of we love Black Vulcan on Super Friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, same. But I think Black Lightning, there was just this amount of goodwill that stayed with you, even if you didn't read the 10 issues of his solo comic, because they kept him in the they kept him going with team ups, and then when he got in the Outsiders, I was like, well, finally,
yeah,
he's
and
back.
beautiful. And not only that, the Outsiders were so well written and drawn.
Oh, Jim Aparo,
just beautiful stuff. I thought he did it. I thought he drew a beautiful Black Lightning.
My favorite, if I may, I want to. My favorite thing, and this might have been my favorite Justice League cover, is the first part of the Black Lightning appearance. Because usually when a superhero guest stars, that means they're joining up.
Mm-hmm.
Black Lightning, no thanks.
Yeah,
he ain't got time for that. But in the it's a lot of weird characters that you've never seen before, and they say, Black Lightning, we want to invite you to join up. And Black Lightning says, with all you jive turkeys in the JLA, nope. That's the cover.
Yeah.
And then it turns out, over the course of these two issues, the Justice League,
I know that one.
They're just screwing with him. They all changed their identities to test him. I'm like, dude, why are you doing this to this poor man?
It's like college hazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the villain is a guy who can mind control rats, which on the nose, I guess, for somebody that lives in a bad part of town. But the idea that these mainstream superheroes are like, you know what, we got to put this guy through his paces, and then at the end of it, Black Lightning still pretty mad about it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Isabel's come back and forth, like other creators too, with their creation, to write Black Lightning several times.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that Isabella is really good at capturing what Black Lightning is all about, even more than like Mike W. Barr did with the Outsiders and other creators. Bobby, what do you think?
I agree. Well, I mean, she knows
why.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she knows the character probably better than anybody at the core.
And protective of the character.
Very protective of the character. She
which is great. A lot of people aren't protective of their characters. And
right.
They really should be.
Well, because because if you think about it too, I mean, in a corporate structure, Isabella has no ownership of Black Lightning. DC can do whatever they want with Black Lightning, care less what she thinks. The fact that they keep, bringing Isabella back to write more is a testament to what DC thinks she brings to it, but also what the fans like, that how she writes these characters. I think as creators, when we write a character, we all feel connected to a character we write. And because I've done that, I still get ideas for characters I wrote years ago that I don't own. There's no reason for me to think of ideas for these characters, but they're in there. You've gotten you really get to know them.
Inevitably, when the next guy comes on board, and I'm sure Bobby, you've experienced this, when the next guy or lady comes on board a character that you've written, you're like,
especially if the first thing they do is everything you know is a lie. That's
my stuff is a lie, is it? I'm Bobby Nash. What do you mean?
It stings a little. Yeah, it stings a little, but part of what we know this going in. I know that my contribution, and it's not like my contribution or in anybody's contribution doesn't exist anymore. The books are still out there. But you do start to feel a kinship with the characters, a bit of they're mine, and then but I think that also helps make a creator, and I won't just say writer because artists do that as well. Artists fall in love with characters they work on. I think I think that helps you tell better stories because you're invested in that character. I've written stuff before with characters I don't care about as much, and I can still do a professional story, but I don't have that emotional connection.
Right.
But when you get a character that you connect with on that kind of level, and like in Isabella's case, created Black Lightning, so there's a really a connection there, and so you kind of just the best way I can say it, you fall in love with a character.
Yeah.
You have a relationship, you fall in love, and sometimes it's a toxic relationship with that character.
An unrequited love. Yeah.
Sometimes it's an unrequited love with that character. Sometimes it is blissful happiness with a character. But there's that connection. And Isabella definitely has that with Black Lightning. Because I don't hear the conversations about Luke Cage and Isabella as much, and they're that so there's definitely more of a relationship with Black Lightning.
Yeah,
at least it's from the outside looking in, that's what it looks like to me, is there's more of a connection on the Black Lightning side.
And one thing I like about of course now the people making comics and making merchandise and that kind of thing, and really everything in the comics realm, a lot of them are our age. So they're doing stuff that we would have wanted to see back in the day. And I say that because I found this guy, Black Lightning action figure, which they never had in the 70s. But this is from Mattel's DC Universe line. And there's the deep V and the high collar.
That is a 70s costume, definitely.
I love this guy. And so I have him just sitting on my desk, and with those jive turkeys from the JLA, it's amazing.
So I also think it's having characters like that who, no disrespect to the character, but was not an A-lister. He wasn't Superman or Batman. I love the fact that in this day and age, those are the characters that are becoming popular in other media.
Yes.
Because they don't come with the baggage. Whether you've read a comic book or not, you know who Superman is, you know who Batman is, you know who Spider-Man is. So you can't do anything really unique with them. There's a perception. You say, we're doing a show called Black Lightning, and half the country goes, who? And you can hook them that way by giving them something interesting they've not seen before. And I we talked about that on the JLA episode. Yeah. Almost all of the Detroit characters became the CW shows.
Yeah.
Because they weren't didn't know they were looking for those characters.
Yeah, exactly. And if you read the Black Lightning, not just those 10 issues, but Black Lightning Outsiders and all that. If you read all that stuff when you're watching the Black Lightning TV show, you go, ooh,
I got that reference.
I get that reference. Exactly. But if you didn't get the reference, it was still a good show.
Yeah.
I have one final question for each of you. Bobby, you can go first. That way, Joe has the opportunity to really shine at the end of everything.
I mean, this is no Justice League satellite blowing up. We'll do
No.
a whole podcast
Yeah,
about that.
he mentioned that because yes, because as people know, I'm trying to do companion shows. I think it's very cool. I had Chuck Patton on, and you can go look around on the YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. I had Chuck Patton on talking about his run of JLA back in the mid '80s, and at the time it wasn't perceived very well by fans. But now, over time, it is kind of a beloved series. So I had Chuck Patton on there, and I had brought on Bobby Nash and Joe Crow to talk about that particular run. And in the middle of it, we were waiting for Bobby Nash to come on. And we just, Joe and I just added the show that Bobby came into the middle of. And I'm taping this show, I'm still editing that show. And we are in the middle of a triple taping because we did one for Andy Mangels and news magazines. Joe had to step away. When Joe stepped away, Bobby went off and I went off to a tangent. I'm like, well, let's just keep this going. And we added the show for that. And then we're talking about Isabella here. So this is like going on now an hour and 40 minutes. And editing this is going to be terrible because I'm still trying to edit Bobby Nash show. And I'm not sure. You know what, Joe? We're going to blame this one on. We're blaming this on Bobby again.
Yes, Bobby ruins
all three of
everything.
these shows down. This is now Bobby's fault. Joe, you're off the hook. You're one of the best.
Thank
guys. Thank you again. We'll have you on again, Bobby. We'll see about you. I'm not sure you will. Joe and I will sit there and chat later, and we'll decide whether or not we're going to have you on another show.
You're
and what we're going to have you on.
you're probably watching this episode. There's a giant black spot over my face.
You know what? I thought about that when we edited stuff. I could possibly do something like that.
It'd be like I'm one of those interviewees where it's like you got to keep my identity secret. So there's a big my face is covered.
Yeah, his name is B asterisk 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 N asterisk asterisk.
So to sum this up, Bobby goes first. Bobby goes first. That way Joe can really shine. Sum up Isabella overall.
Oh, fantastic fantastic writer. I'm impressed with the work that Tony, now Jenny, Isabella does. I am also I also enjoy the person. I enjoy talking to Jenny online and seeing the posts, and I've never met her in person, but we've talked online, and I think just a wonderful creator. Definitely worth a look. If you've never read any Tony/Jenny Isabella, you should definitely give it a shot.
Before you go on, Joe, I want to make a quick comment because I did have the opportunity to take Jenny Blake a little bit back on, and I met Tony Isabella back when I was a kid, as a teenager, and Jenny Blake, and I would really make sure that I covered the things that Jenny Blake wanted to do, and we talked about, and it was a real honor to tape. I was one of them icons that, because Bobby and I talked about this before, where that fan blade comes out and I can't believe I'm taking this person. I can't believe I met this, Bobby and I. And it was such an honor to have Isabella on the show. And I was hoping to get her on again sometime in the future. I don't know what that will happen because everybody's schedules are wonky. But yes, I agree with everything you said. But Joe, give us your final thoughts on Isabella.
There's so much that you can go back and find that Isabella wrote, and there's like we've been saying, the Isabella's work is not Englehart, Steve Gerber, Roger Stern, that people remember and talk about, but the glue is Isabella. Isabella did years of Ghost Rider, which was a terrific comic. And there's so much. And there was a Hawkman miniseries that I remember from the 80s. There's so much stuff you can find, and you may be surprised to know, like, oh, that was Isabella. The champions from Marvel, another quickly canceled series that which I seem to gravitate to.
I would. There, you know what? I actually wanted to do a Isabella show on all types of stuff written in the Bronze Age, but there's just only so much time. So I like to revisit, do a couple of shows on the Bronze Age, because you're right. You said that not an Engelhart, not a Gerber, not a Conway, but that doesn't take away contributions and the importance of what Isabella did during that time. And it was like one of the linchpins, the bedrock. I mean, even with Bill, I mean, imagine what comics would be without Isabella.
Yeah. Well, a workhorse. I mean, there were, and comics are full of people like that who were workhorses, that were steady, that were there all the time.
And put out quality comics.
Yeah, Isabella. You mentioned Bill Mantlo earlier. Sal Buscema on the art side.
Yeah,
Sal Buscema, was never a superstar.
Yeah,
but Sal was there. Yeah.
When we're talking about writers outside of Mantlo and Isabella, I don't think there's anybody else that fits into that type of model at Marvel at the time.
That is a good point, and I didn't think about when you compare him to Bill Mantlo. Yeah, if
not that they're separate and different, had different contributions, but the Isabella and the Mantlo, there was nobody else like them at Marvel. And take either one of them out, especially like Isabella, things would be much different.
Mm-hmm.
Go on, Joe. Hey, wrap this up, Joe.
That was I was just there's today you can find Isabella's work in graphic novels, and just flip through random back issues at a good comic store, not one of those dusty ones where but you can find so much good stuff and I absolutely love that Isabella is still working today and cranking out stuff, and
we talk about that in the show and some of the stuff.
And I would like to meet her one day, and because I've met very few comics creators, and she's on the list of people that I would absolutely love to talk to and bug to death about Black Lightning and everything else. But so it's Black Lightning's just like we've been saying. I think my conclusion for Black Lightning is he's not the first string, and so he's one of those guys that it's not Black Lightning and the Outsiders, but he's in the Outsiders. There's something about the people that make up the content, and really Black Lightning is like Isabella in that way. When Black Lightning's in something, you're like, all right, this is going to be neat. When you discover that Isabella is writing it, same deal.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby Nash, Joe Crow, thank you so much for this session. I will have you on again. Definitely, Joe. Bobby will think about it. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye, guys.
I'm going to try to end this stream without leaving you guys. If I leave you guys, we'll end it. But we'll give it a chance to talk off. Let's see what this works.